Elvis slowed the idling Cadillac to a whisper at the edge of the old Tupelo schoolyard. It was 1973, and every brick of that weathered facade felt like a heartbeat from his childhood. Tight-laced shoes clicking in time to a marching band drill, his young spine straining for attention. He asked no questions, raised no eyebrows, simply stepped from the car in plain clothes, letting the dusk settle around him. Then he heard it. A child's clear, unwavering voice guiding 70 small singers through an old hymn. The choreography was precise, yet there was a tenderness in each lifted hand. The conductor's gentle count, 1, 2, 3, 4, cut through decades of silence in Elvis's mind. He recognized that voice before he saw the silhouette. Mr. Henderson, age 81, still standing tall at the podium, eyes bright despite time's weight. In that suspended moment, between the echo of forgotten marches and the hopeful rise of youthful song, Elvis felt something shift. He was no longer a superstar drifting between stages. He was just another boy in Tupelo, listening to the man who once taught him to carry himself with pride. And somewhere in the hush, he knew he couldn't leave without joining the chorus. Elvis Presley's Cadillac rolled down the two-lane road into Tupelo, just as the late summer sun dipped behind the cotton fields, painting the low-hanging clouds in ribbons of amber and rose. There were no motorcade fanfare, no flashing cameras, no press clippings waiting at the front desk of a hotel. Tonight, he was a stranger in his own hometown, drifting back to the familiar landmarks of his childhood under a thin veneer of secrecy. Beyond the city limits, once tall stands of pine trees gave way to man-made structures, rusted farm equipment, a crumbling feed mill, and finally, the modest brick facade of West Tupelo Elementary. The old sign, proclaiming "Home of the City Saints," leaned at a slight angle, its lettering peeling in places. Elvis hesitated, the engine rumbling at idle, as memories tugged at the edges of his mind. The smell of school paint in the spring, the creak of classroom doors on frosty mornings, and the stern but kind voice of the music teacher who had first recognized something special in his voice. He stepped out of the car, his dark shirt unbuttoned at the collar, cowboy boots scuffed from years of travel, and sunglasses still shielding his eyes even in the fading light. A soft breeze carried the distant laughter of children. A rehearsal in the auditorium, perhaps. He felt drawn toward that sound, as if the past itself were calling him back to its embrace. The auditorium door, its blue paint chipped and weather-beaten, stood slightly ajar. Pushing it open, Elvis slipped into the dim hall where rows of folding chairs held scattered dozens of students, their attention fixed on an elderly man at the front who tapped a baton against his palm with a metronome's steady rhythm. The hush that fell over the space at Elvis's entrance was gentle, curious, courteous, but not awestruck. These children did not yet know the legend that had returned among them. The conductor, Mr. Henderson, paused mid-rehearsal, his graying hair haloed by a single overhead lamp. He lowered his baton and peered toward the doorway. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but he made no show of it. Not tonight. Instead, he gave a subtle nod, inviting Elvis further inside. The children exchanged glances, unsure why a reserved stranger had slipped into their midst, but they resumed their singing at the cracked harmonies Henderson directed. Elvis moved toward the back row, seating himself on a battered folding chair, observing the faces of the boys and girls learning a simple hymn. The notes rose unevenly, some voices strong, others tentative, but all accompanied by a quiet reverence that carried more weight than any sold-out stadium roar. He watched the way Henderson's hands guided them, coaxing confidence through every raised melody, the same way he had once guided a timid 9-year-old to stand up straight and sing before an expectant class. After the final chord faded, Henderson tapped his baton once, setting the metronome clicking again. He then lowered his gaze to the floor for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, without looking up. "Elvis, I'll never ask you to take center stage tonight. These children need their moment. They need to believe in their own voices." Elvis felt a lump in his throat, an echo of countless rehearsals under the same roof decades ago. "They deserve it," he replied softly, removing his sunglasses. The students, curious now, watched the private exchange between the man they knew only as Mr. Henderson and this reticent newcomer. In the hallway afterward, Henderson led Elvis past lockers tangled with volleyball nets and walls lined with dusty trophies. They emerged into a small practice room, where old sheet music lay strewn across a piano bench. "I didn't know this place would still have you in it," Henderson said, resting a hand on Elvis's shoulder. "Not many return to the beginning." Elvis opened his mouth, then closed it. Instead, he let his eyes sweep over the faded music stands, the scuffed wooden floor where so many footsteps had thudded in rhythm, and the windows that had let in sunlight on hopeful mornings. He thought of how far he'd traveled, from Memphis stages to Las Vegas marquees, from record-breaking tours to silver-screen triumphs, and how all that noise had sometimes overshadowed the simple truth he had learned right here, that music was more than applause. It was connection. "Tell me," Henderson said, voice gentle, "what brought you back?" Elvis looked at the floor, fingers lingering on the edge of a piano key. He felt the centuries of experience within him distilled to a single, honest impulse. "I wanted to remember," he said, "to feel what it was like to be small again." That evening, as the sun slipped fully below the horizon, Elvis Presley sat among adolescents learning to sing, no longer the king, but simply a man seeking his roots. The auditorium lights dimmed, and in the silent aftermath of rehearsal, he allowed himself to be guided back to the moment when all he had was a melody and a teacher who believed in him. And in that return to childhood, he rediscovered a sacred spark that no stage lights could ever ignite. Elvis left the old auditorium with Henderson's words echoing in his mind. The evening breeze carried the faint hum of cicadas and the distant rumble of the railroad tracks that cut through Tupelo's southern edge. As he stepped back onto the cracked pavement, he felt the weight of decades pressing on him. Years of sold-out arenas, glittering spotlights, and the relentless roar of adoring crowds. Yet here, under a dim street lamp outside the school, the world felt smaller, simpler. Mr. Henderson fell into step beside him, cane tapping a steady rhythm on the asphalt. "You looked lost in there," the teacher said quietly. "Not like a man returning, like someone searching." Elvis nodded, the leather of his jacket creaking as he shifted. "There's so much I've forgotten, Henderson. The moments before the lights came on. The feeling that a single note could mean everything." Henderson's pale eyes softened. "And did you find it again tonight?" His question landed not as curiosity, but as a careful probe into Elvis's soul. The singer paused, hands sliding into his pockets. He stared down at the scuffed tip of his boot. In that hush, the distant strains of a church choir practice drifted from a nearby building, a fragment of amazing grace that soared and dipped on summer air. Elvis inhaled, as if drawing that melody deep into his lungs, and exhaled a long, steady sigh. "I found a piece," he admitted, "but it's like chasing a shadow. Every time I think I've caught it, there's something new to remember, and something old to grieve." Henderson stopped at a street corner, leaning on his cane. The two men faced each other in the pool of light beneath a flickering street lamp. Elvis's reflection wavered beside his mentor's, superimposed over rows of dusty homes and tangled hedges. "Let me tell you something I didn't say in the school," Henderson began. "I saw that boy in you, afraid to stand, tongue-tied, trembling under bright eyes that expected perfection. A boy who needed courage more than anything else." Elvis's throat tightened. He could almost feel his 9-year-old self slipping forward, the fraying cuffs of hand-me-downs, the knot in his stomach before uttering the first note of Old Shep. He remembered Mrs. Gladys Presley's gentle hush as she brushed his hair, her murmured prayers that he would find strength in his own voice, and now, decades later, he realized how little he had grasped that lesson beyond the stage. Henderson tapped his cane again. "I taught you music, Elvis. I taught you posture, timing, even how to shape a phrase so it could carry. But I never taught you how to carry yourself when the music stopped." Elvis looked up, meeting those silver-rimmed eyes. "I lost myself somewhere between the verses," he confessed. "The king became more than me, and I didn't know how to be just myself anymore." They resumed walking, heading toward a small, unmarked door at the back of the school, a supply entrance Henderson used to slip in after hours. Inside, a narrow hallway led to a modest office, where a single desk lamp glowed over stacks of sheet music and faded photograph of past graduates. Henderson settled into a tall-backed chair, and Elvis stood opposite him, the empty desk between them, a barrier and a bridge. Henderson reached into a drawer and produced a thin notebook bound in cracked leather. Its pages were yellowed with age, filled with cramped, looping handwriting. "This was mine," he said, opening to the first page. "The songs I wrote as a boy, thinking they'd never leave these walls." Elvis leaned closer. On the page, lines sketched the chords of a simple melody, annotated with teenage fervor. "Sing for those who cannot. Sing until the hurt is gone." Beneath the notes, in faded pencil, a child's scrawl. "Give me courage to stand and sing." Henderson's voice grew soft, almost reverent. "I thought I'd leave it behind when I grew up, when I settled into teaching and life took me in other directions. But that notebook reminded me that the voice belongs not to the stage, but to heart and mind, and no matter how far you travel, you carry those pages with you." Elvis closed his eyes, running a fingertip across the brittle parchment. The room felt suddenly alive with possibility, the air tinged by the ghosts of unspoken prayers and half-remembered refrains. He remembered the first time he'd heard military brass at a town parade, the way trumpets had opened his chest to something fierce and raw. He remembered old gospel records spinning on a rickety turntable, the crackle before Mahalia Jackson's voice rolled across the living room. Each scrap of memory shimmered in this moment, tethering him to a past he had tried so hard to outgrow. "Thank you," Elvis said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "You gave me something I forgot to value." Henderson leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "Now you know," he said, "that music is a gift you pass on. You pass it to the listener, and sometimes it finds its way back home." Elvis folded the notebook gently, slipping it into his jacket pocket. In that small act, he tucked away a promise: to remember the boy behind the legend, to carry his own voice with humility, and to share that gift whenever he could. They stood together in the hush of the night, two teachers bound by memory and melody. From the hallway came the soft murmur of a heater shutting down, the distant drip of a leaky faucet, the steady breathing of a building about to sleep. And as Elvis stepped back into the cool air of Tupelo's main street, he felt a quiet determination reawakened within him, to live not for the applause, but for the moments where music, and the humanity behind it, truly mattered. The next evening, dawn still warm on his shoulders, Elvis slipped into the back entrance of the old Tupelo school once more. Word of his presence had reached only Mr. Henderson and a handful of trusted staff. No press, no fanfare, only hushed wonder among teachers who recognized the once mighty performer, wandering their dimly lit hallways like a curious student. Tonight was the annual Fall Chorale, a modest program of hymns, folk tunes, and children's rounds performed by 6 elementary schoolers. The auditorium retained its original wooden benches and raked floorboards, places Elvis had first encountered the thrill of music led by Henderson's patient hand. Now those very boards bore the scuffed shoes of tiny choristers, eyes shining under the stage lights. Elvis took a seat at the side aisle, dressed simply in jeans and a plain white shirt. A single spotlight settled on the conductor's podium, and as the children filed on stage, rows of eager faces, hair neat, dresses and shirts crisp, Elvis felt a flutter of nerves. He had not sung in such close quarters, unamplified, since he was a boy performing at church socials in Tupelo's smoky fellowship halls. Tonight, he would not be king. He was just another voice. Mr. Henderson, sensing the unsaid question in Elvis's stance, beckoned him forward. The children parted like a gentle tide as Elvis climbed the wooden steps and took his place at the far right of the chorus. The organist's pedal warmed the air with soft chords, and Henderson raised his baton. "Let us honor our teachers and our town tonight," Henderson murmured to the troupe, then turned, exhaling slowly, "and receive our guest, Elvis Presley, as one of our own." A ripple of excitement passed through the children. Elvis closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the swirl of butterflies he felt before his first solo on that very stage. Now he inhaled deeply through the nose, the dusty scent of old wood and varnish anchoring him. The first piece began, a simple arrangement of "This Little Light of Mine." The children's voices rose, sometimes wavering, but always earnest. Elvis matched their tempo, leaning in, feeling each syllable connect. He projected not for applause, but to hold together this fragile web of sound. When the song concluded, applause trembled like leaves in a gentle wind. But before the next number, Henderson whispered to the choir, "For our final song, join me in a special arrangement. Friends, let us sing 'If I Can Dream.'" A hush fell. "If I can dream of a better land," the children began, tentative. Elvis stood rigid, then let the melody flow through him. His voice, rich, resonant, unamplified, slipped into the gaps between their soft, youthful notes. Each phrase he offered was measured, gentle, a bridge between their innocence and his yearning. The auditorium transformed. The high school converts, half listening, half paying attention, leaning forward to catch every syllable. A teacher dabbed her eyes. In the balcony, a clerk from the town hall stared, awed. Elvis's voice guided the chorus through the refrain, not soaring for effect, but steady, confident, comforting. The children responded in kind, voices strengthening with each verse. No lights flashed, no cameras rolled, only the small audience and a school stage that felt as vast as any Las Vegas showroom. At the final note, "Dream on, dream on," the hall erupted. The children beamed, collars damp with sweat. Henderson dropped his baton, overcome. Elvis simply exhaled, shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. He stepped down from the stage while applause still rippled around him. Backstage, he leaned against the wall, heart pounding, eyes bright. Moments later, the choir trickled off. One small boy lingered, shy, glasses sliding down his nose. He held a folded piece of paper. Elvis knelt. The child handed him the note. He unfolded it. A shaky scrawl read, Thank you for reminding me I matter." The boy's voice cracked as he spoke. "Sir, you made me want to sing again." Elvis's throat tightened. He placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "And you reminded me," he said softly, "why I sing." Behind him, Henderson stood with wizened pride. Elvis rose and draped an arm around his old teacher. Together they watched the hallway fill with parents and children, all buzzing with the magic of an unlikely duet. A superstar giving of himself as one of many, and a chorus of young voices lifting him higher than any stage ever could. Outside, the night air was cool, scented with damp leaves. Elvis lingered on the steps, exchanging quiet words with Henderson about the next day's work. A promise to help the school, to bring in new instruments, to shine a light on this place that had once shone a light on him. And as he slipped away into the darkness, no limousine waiting, only a city that slept, Elvis carried with him something far more precious than fame. The simple joy of singing for its own sake, shared with a chorus of hopeful hearts. Elvis awoke the following morning before dawn, unsettled and alight with purpose. The remnants of last night's choir performance lingered in his mind, children's voices entwined with his own echoing in the empty corridors of memory. He dressed quickly in a simple navy blazer and worn jeans, then slipped from Graceland's main house without fanfare, intent upon honoring an unspoken promise. A single black Cadillac idled at the gate, his driver already present, awaiting instructions. Without speaking, Elvis climbed in, handed his house key to the chauffeur, and murmured, "Let's head back to Tupelo." The car rolled away under the silver sweep of an almost full moon, dew settling on the lawn like scattered pearls. By mid-morning, the road had carried them north into Mississippi's fields, where cotton stalks swayed softly in the breeze. Elvis's heart thrummed with anticipation. Each mile felt like a step closer to absolution. He had left behind the bright lights and adoring crowds of Las Vegas, and now sought solace in the humblest of venues, the very auditorium where his own voice was born. Upon arrival, he found the school's battered oak doors unlocked, the hallway empty save for the scent of chalk and varnish. Mr. Henderson, stooped yet alert, waited beside the stage, a shepherd for his flock of notes and memories. He greeted Elvis with a nod, as though meeting a dear friend returning from a long voyage. "Elvis," he said, voice quavering with emotion, "you came back." Elvis simply smiled, the weight of yesterday's music still lingering in his gaze. "I promised to help," he replied softly, "and I keep my word." That afternoon, a small assembly of school board members, teachers, and local parents gathered beneath the peeling paint of the auditorium's proscenium. They murmured with curiosity when Elvis Presley, superstar of the world, stepped forward in their midst, not on a grand stage, but on creaky floorboards marked by countless past rehearsals. In his hand, he carried a leather-bound checkbook and several manila envelopes. He cleared his throat, his voice low and earnest. "I owe so much of who I am to this place, and to Mr. Henderson's belief in me. These children deserve instruments as well as instruction. So today, I am donating $5,000 to purchase new pianos, music stands, and sheet music. I'd also like to fund a scholarship for any student who shows promise but cannot afford lessons." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Astonishment, gratitude, tears. A school board member, near tears herself, stepped forward to accept the gift. The check was made out to the Tupelo School Music Department, endorsed immediately by Henderson's trembling hand. After the formalities, Elvis sought out the youngest members of the choir, guiding them one by one to the edge of the stage. He knelt to meet their eyes, handing each a small silver lapel pin in the shape of a musical note. "For you," he said, Voice hushed. Let this remind you of your voice, and how it echoes farther than you know. Among them stood the boy who had given him the note, eyes round with wonder. Elvis clasped the boy's shoulder. Keep singing, son, he whispered, and remember that someone out there believes in you. The child's lips trembled as he nodded, pin clasped tight against his chest. The scholar among them. As afternoon waned into early evening, Elvis and Mr. Henderson stepped into a nearby classroom stacked with dusty books and faded portraits of former principals. There, behind a worn oak desk, sat a lanky teenager named Walter, who'd earned the scholarship Elvis had anonymously funded years before. Walter's life had turned on that chance. He now studied music composition at a regional conservatory on the other side of the state. Walter rose to greet Elvis, eyes alight. "Mr. Presley," he stammered, "you changed my life." Elvis shook his head, pride soft in his expression. "You changed yours, Walter. I just gave you a pen. You wrote the story." The three men exchanged stories of progress surveys, recital auditions, and dreams sketched in margins of notebook paper. Later, as Elvis watched Walter guide him through a new piano, each touch a testament to months of hard practice, he felt a peace he had not known in years. Night fell in velvet shadows by the time Elvis re-emerged onto the empty lawn. Mr. Henderson walked him to the Cadillac, their footsteps stirring the crisp autumn leaves. The old teacher, leaning on his cane, fixed Elvis with a steady gaze. "Thank you," Henderson rasped, "not just for what you've done, but for remembering." Elvis offered a gentle nod. "I never forgot." As the car eased onto Highway 45, Elvis gazed back at the school's simple silhouette, windows dark but alive with promise. The hum of the engine faded beneath his breath. Music lives on, in hands not even yet old enough to hold a microphone. And as the road stretched toward Memphis, Elvis carried with him more than funds and instruments. He held the rekindled spark of purpose. In that quiet return, he had planted seeds that would yield harmony for generations. A testament that even a king must sometimes walk among his roots to discover the true song of his soul.